They are the power elite, the ones who had the plan that I describe in my book. I don't do it until the book is almost over. They spelled out in detail how they were going to do it. The shadow government, a network of central banks, a graduated income tax, tax-exempt foundations to be able to shelter their own wealth from taxation. The taxation they were going to put against earnings, earned income, the mark of the middle class. They spelled all of these things out. They spelled out how they would need to poison the people they didn't want, the people of the abyss.
Hey friends, that was the voice of Wayne Jett. And this video interview with Wayne Jett may go down as one of the most important interviews I've ever done. The man is an absolute wealth of knowledge about the history of the criminal banking cartel, the international criminal bankers, and their devious, satanic, overt plan to literally extinguish humanity. It's a plan that we're all aware of, and yet when you hear it quantified by somebody as knowledgeable as Wayne Jett, it gives you goosebumps. I really think you're going to enjoy this one very much. And a little side note, I feel badly that I didn't get this man on sooner, and I will definitely get him on again in the future. He's a true patriot and a truth teller. And I'd like you all to consider purchasing his book, The Fruits of Graft, as a Christmas gift this year for yourself, for family. Pass it on. He tells me he only has 750 of these books left, and I'd be tickled if we could move them all. His website is classicalcapital.com. That's the best place to get the book. And it's just patriotic men like Wayne Jett that we all need to support. And I know you guys are among the best, most generous people on all of YouTube, so I just wanted to share that with you. I'll put the link to Wayne's site, Classical Capital, below this video. And I just really want you guys to know how much I very much appreciate you. And so before we begin this interview with Wayne Jett, I want to let you know too that this interview is brought to you in part by the world's easiest to use VPN, Virtual Shield. Do you even realize how much data about you Facebook and Google have? According to this article from The Guardian, the harvesting of our personal data goes far beyond what many of us could imagine. That's why you owe it to yourself to use one of the fastest virtual private networks in the world, Virtual Shield. Their no-log policy protects users from any data breaches. And this Christmas month, Virtual Shield is offering 35% off all VPN plans and all premium add-ons, including Protection Plus, residential access, monthly maintenance, phone support, and VIP performance plans. And don't forget about IdentiSafe, which allows you the ability to block off your computer microphone and camera access from any unwanted hackers or spies. And again, all Christmas month, Virtual Shield is offering 35% off all VPN plans. You have the right to remain private. Do yourself a favor and get Virtual Shield. The link is below this video. Hey friends, welcome back, and thanks so much for clicking play. We're going to stay on point with the economy and the Fed with Wayne Jett. He's an author. His book is called The Fruits of Graft, Great Depressions Then and Now, and it's great to have him here. Wayne, thanks for joining us.
Very honored to be here with you and your audience. Thanks, Sean.
Well, thanks for coming on. And your latest article over there at classicalcapital.com is called Making the Great Depression, Planning, Actions, and Objectives. They do make these Great Depressions, don't they? These international bankers, the Fed, which Donald Trump has called the biggest threat to his agenda.
Well, they certainly do, and that's exactly what made me write that book. I didn't do it because I just love to spend my time that way. Once I got into the financial sector in the early 2000s, after being in the practice of law, primarily in federal courts for 30 years or so, I learned pretty quickly in writing for a very good economic forecasting firm, Polyconomics, that I was not permitted to write about financial fraud in the markets. And it wasn't so much the attitude of that particular firm, it was the attitude of publishers in general, newspapers, other websites, and so forth. For example, I was told by one prominent website that's still out there that if an article that I had submitted to them, they had asked me please to submit articles to them. I had done so for a period of time. I submitted one in which I addressed the financial fraud problem in the markets, and was told that by the publisher that if if he published that, I could never write for them again, and he would be fired. So I also was speaking at that time to the CFAs, chartered financial analysts, the ones who do the heavy lifting in statistics. And I learned there that it was treading on thin ice to talk about financial fraud, but it is a major factor. And I finally decided on my own to, I had an idea of where I wanted to look about facts on the Great Depression. The diaries of the Treasury Secretary of FDR, which had been edited with his Morgenthau's assistance and published by an historian from Yale. So I pulled out this multi-volume work, and I started looking a little bit. I found something and I mentioned it to the man I was working for, a very prominent man, Jude Winniski. He was at one time associate editor of the Wall Street Journal's opinion page, but was heading Polyeconomics at that time, and he told me I had to write a book. That was only the first item I found. He had written a book explaining the Great Crash. Thought he had explained it, but it was an important book. But he certainly believed that nobody had explained the Great Depression satisfactorily. He died a few months after that, very suddenly. And as a result, it came around to my writing, doing more research. And then after I found more, I knew that I had things that had not been reported. In my opinion, there's certainly very significant economic facts that simply had been left alone by the economists and the historians. And so I wrote the book for that reason, and found many more very compelling things. I have no doubt that Jude Winniski, rest his soul, would have been completely off the wall about what had been done, basically to cause extremely severe deflation of the money supply. But I'd like to be able to tell your audience exactly what was done to create that deflation, to sap the money out of the economy, to make certain that things would be selling for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 cents on the dollar. And so the wealthy ones could buy these assets, the prize assets of the worldwide, for 5 cents on the dollar. That's how J. Paul Getty made his fortune, and declared so, that it was amazing that he could buy oil assets all over the world for 5 cents on the dollar. So there we are.
It's interesting because for those of us who understand that the Federal Reserve was implemented essentially under Woodrow Wilson's watch back in 1913, we've been living under the yoke of this central bank, this privately owned central bank, ever since, for more than 100 years. And President Trump rightly calls the Fed the biggest threat to his agenda. What is the possibility that this president could throw off the yoke of the central bank? What is the possibility that he could take the privilege of printing money back from the Fed and give it to the Treasury where it rightly belongs? It's a war he may have to fight, according to my last guest, David Jensen.
I believe that's the case. I think the prospects are very good. I've been saying, writing for quite some time, that we ought to do that as soon as possible. The longer the Fed goes, the more it gets into the position of completely crashing its currency, the debts it owes to us. That is, it's been issuing this paper for all these years, entitling itself to buy things with it. We then pass those along, and as the years pass by, it has sharply reduced the value of that currency, the money it has to pay back to us for all it's been able to buy with that money. And as a result, its end game is to crash the currency and leave the rest of us penniless, and then go along with its business in creating the next kind of global rule. But what I would say about the Fed at this point in regard to the Great Depression is that, in fact, it was not used as the chief instrument of the Great Depression. It is not the one that was the primary tool for causing the deflation. It was done by the executives branch, the presidents, particularly FDR, but Herbert Hoover got it going. He was not an economist. He was had been a world-class engineer, had made his own money, so really was a rich man who came from the working class, you might say. But at the same time, he was not really a rock-ribbed Republican as he's pictured now. He actually tried to talk FDR into running for president as a Democrat in 1920, at the end of Wilson's second term, so that Hoover, could be the vice presidential candidate on the ticket with FDR. FDR wouldn't do it because he knew it wasn't the time for Democrats to get elected again, since they had really double-crossed their own party. The whole tax thing was something that Wilson had promised not to do in his 1912 campaign, and no sooner did he get sworn into office than the first year he did both the graduated income tax and the Federal Reserve, both of which he had promised not to do. But he was bought by Wall Street beforehand. Wall Street, we're not talking brokers here. We're talking about the international cabal that owns the banks.
The Prescott Bushes and the cabal.
The ones who hire the bankers to be their spokesman, to handle their money and so forth. But they are the power elite, the ones who had the plan that I describe in my book. I don't do it until the book is almost over. But in 1901, there was a little book written by H.G. Wells, who at that time was obscure. He just wrote horror stories and science fiction. But he wrote this little book that after the first third of it, which is to make most people throw it away because it's worthless, the next 2/3 of the book is the plan and the viewpoint written on behalf of the ruling elite. This is the mess we're in. That is, the middle class is growing so fast and is gaining political power. If we don't destroy it completely now, we'll lose our ability to do so. And therefore, we're undertaking this plan. Here's how we're going to do it. By the year 2000, we'll learn to poison all the people we don't want to survive. We will leave only 2 classes. We have to smash the middle class entirely, destroy it completely, and then we'll have the stable 2-class system we've had for centuries before. That is, ourselves as the rulers, and the only ones left will be our slaves or servants.
That's bone-chilling.
Now,
Wayne, that's literally bone-chilling, because that is the plan that's been unfolding decade after decade, and it's really clear now that that's exactly what the liberal Democrats want. They want socialism. They want communism. They want to destroy the middle class. They want to destroy sovereignty. They want to destroy all that is good in the name of what? This communist bankster manifesto?
Well, let me tell you. They spelled out in detail how they were going to do it. The shadow government, the federal central bank, a network of central banks, a graduated income tax, tax-exempt foundations to be able to shelter their own wealth from taxation. The taxation they were going to put against earnings, earned income, the mark of the middle class. They spelled all of these things out. They spelled out how they would need to poison the people they didn't want, the people of the abyss. They said those were the yellows, the blacks, the red-skinned, the dirty-skinned whites, the Jews. All of these are spelled out in detail, their whole plan for the century to get to the point of the 2-class system they wanted. And what happened to the author? He was brought to the palaces of Europe. He was brought to the White House of Teddy Roosevelt as the honored guest on the arm of U.S. American intellectuals.
And that's H.G. Wells, right?
That's H.G. Wells. He came out of that reception with Theodore Roosevelt saying, "This is the man, the human demigod of whom I have dreamed." That was Teddy Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt and Eleanor invited him for extended stays to their White House at least 3 times. He was invited to visit with Stalin. He was honored all over the world. This was the result of this little book that put him on the map. Margaret Sanger sang his praises, so forth and so on and so on. And if you look at that little book today called Anticipations, it's cited in my book, the very terminology that it used is so absolutely outrageous in terms of today's politics that the man would have, if he escaped being hanged on the spot, he would certainly be run from society. And yet this man was celebrated his entire life, invited back again and again for consultations with leaders, because I believe he was carrying the messages from the cabal the leaders could talk directly with and get some idea. And of course, it turns out there was confirmation that FDR was a very, very highly trusted operative, so much so that he was practically given his head in terms of the way to advance the agenda. And he did so his entire presidency. I'd be happy to tell you some of the things that he did to make certain that the Depression was as long and as deep as he wanted it to be, so that the ruling elite could buy those assets without fear that prices were going to go back up. They didn't have to just bargain and so forth. They could wait out any seller and buy whatever assets, whether you're talking about mining assets or whatever. That was the plan. But I'd like to be able to tell you a little bit. I'm sure you and your audience would recognize immediately the effects of these things. And the fact is that historians and economists simply have not reported them. They have mischaracterized, for example, the way in which the devaluation of the dollar took place. The devaluation is always talked about as if, well, that's the way you get more money into the economy. The way FDR did it, he specifically designed it to be done in such a way that not one single dollar would be added to the economy, and the purchasing power of existing dollars, which were practically none, because of the effects of Smoot-Hawley and so forth, pardon me, the way he did it decreased the purchasing power of the dollars already there by about 41%. Mm-hmm. Let me tell you exactly what he did. The Smoot-Hawley had, within 18 months of its being adopted, by the end of 31, exports and imports were down about 70%, both. So factories had shut down, people were laid off, everything had to be liquidated. And of course, because there was no money, they really sold it at fire sale prices, everything. And when they got whatever funds from it they could, there was nothing to invest in. No new business would prosper. And so they bought gold, which they were entitled to do then. $20.67 an ounce is what they paid for it. Anybody who had any money. Because Roosevelt was hinting that he was going to devalue. So of course you protect yourself. And what does he do as soon as he takes office?
Confiscates the gold.
He confiscates the gold, order that it all be taken in at $20.67 an ounce. You get not one penny of relief in terms of the amount you paid for it.
And then they revalue it at what, 35?
At $35 an ounce. There was a 71% gain, I think, on that for somebody. And of course, you and I know, now we know, that all of that gain on that was transferred from the Treasury to the Exchange Stabilization Fund, a secret fund which has operated ever since without any review by the Congress at all, any government oversight. And in fact, we learn that the ESF, Exchange Stabilization Fund, is not even subject to federal law. It's as if it were the City of London or the Vatican. It operates as its own entity, subject to no U.S. laws,
Right.
and still does whatever it wants without any kind of reporting.
Wayne, it's just bone chilling. And you know what? Q, who, believe it or not, folks, this learned man has written about in his articles. You can go to Classical Capital right now and read The Plan is Working, Stay the Course, which Wayne wrote on December 3rd. And this one, QAnon and POTUS, Leave the Connection Alone, from December 4th. Q has said, Wayne, that these people are pure evil. What you've just described is a diabolical plan that was pure evil, to hurt people, to kill people, to starve people out, to take from the poor and give to the rich. It's a little bit shocking to hear that historical perspective from your narrative, the way you describe it, versus the mainstream media narrative, which always paints a very, very different picture, don't they? Because these banksters have the mainstream media in their pocket.
No question about it. And let me tell you, in all honesty, Sean, what I just described to you is only the very tip of the iceberg of what Roosevelt himself did. It is the narrowest of things compared to, I've got a half a dozen other things that are absolutely as bad or worse than what I've just described to you. First off, for example, on Hoover. Hoover, being the world-class engineer, thought he was a Mr. Fix-It, but he rolled over on three things. They weren't his ideas. Smoot-Hawley high taxes, as I said, in 18 months shut down international trade by 70% as far as the U.S. was concerned. And yet he could have stopped that with a word because he controlled both houses of Congress. He certainly could have vetoed it. It passed by only 3 votes. And they had more Democrat votes. I mean, they had 5 Democrat votes to help the Republicans. Certainly he could have stopped it, but he let it go through and do that. Secondly, people knew that the crash of 29 was completely fraudulent, that there was rampant financial fraud in terms of selling fake stock, primarily, but all kinds of fraud causing the crash. I have identified how that really happened. Jude Winniski had written that it was connected directly. He had found in his own research that the days of the crash, the selling, the avalanches of selling was triggered right at the time on each day that a vote was taken on the floor of the U.S. Senate advancing Smoot-Hawley toward passage and adopting a high tariff rate on a particular commodity. He had identified that, and so those 5 days were all triggered by that particular vote on the floor of the Senate. I believe that was a ruse. It was a trigger adopted by the ruling elite, the ones who were going to do the fraudulent trading, that they shared among those who were doing the trading, and it was their sign that when this happens, you vote. The reason they did that, I mean, you sell naked short. What we call naked short now, they call it watering the stock then. And they sold them by millions of shares, crashing prices. And then, of course, when they got to the bottom, they buy it all back for cents on the dollar.
Just like Rothschild did after the Battle of Waterloo.
That's correct. That is correct.
Let's stay on point here, though, with, you say you call them the ruling elite. Can we put a name on it? Is it the Paseurs? Is it the Rothschilds? Is it the Morgans? Is it Queen Elizabeth? Who is the ruling elite? Who does this? Well, Rothschild is clearly guilty of it. You know, after the Battle of Waterloo, the Rothschilds did the same exact thing then. Yes. So yes. Is it the Rothschilds that were behind this as well here?
Well, of course they were a part of it, behind it. I think it was a network. You can call it the cabal, but there are power centers that ebb and flow from time to time, but they are all extremely powerful. The Vatican, the City of London, the Rothschild enterprises the world over and so forth, they use the network as they need to in the particular circumstances. But as I reveal in a late chapter of my book, there was an elite operative in the Soviet Union. He had formerly served as the ambassador of the Soviet Union to France. Very high level, and of course worked for Stalin, but he was arrested as a Trotskyite in the mid-30s during the Trotsky Purge. Trotsky was certainly an operative, married into the cabal of ruling elite, and wound up leaving the Soviet Union. But nevertheless, the man by the name of Rakovsky, the former French ambassador, was arrested, given a show trial, found guilty, sentenced to death, and then interrogated. And by a set of circumstances, the man who was assigned as the doctor to administer the so-called truth drugs, he actually knew how to administer drugs to allow the person to relax under this great stress so that his memory worked well and his testimony would be lucid and so forth. And for this particular person under question, he obviously decided that the testimony was so brilliant, so riveting, that he took the chance. He made not only the 2 copies he was required to make, one for the NKVD and one for Stalin. He made a 3rd copy, and it was found on his body at the time of his death during World War II. That discussion confirms not only that this Rakovsky, for example, was involved in the transfer of funds from Western banks into the Bolsheviks for their invasion of Russia in 1917, and the capture of the Tsar and so forth, and the subsequent murder and so forth. So this was a very high-level man, and he was questioned at great length about how the ruling elite work. How do you get your instructions? How do you get your orders and so forth? I can't really take all the time to describe those in detail, but among the things that he revealed in that, as I mentioned in this recent article that I summarize that tale, that story, and he described Franklin D. Roosevelt, the US president, as a highly trusted operative of the ruling elite.
Yeah, a foot soldier.
I've described him in my book as a traitor to his electorate, not to his class, and yet U.S. historians to this day, even after my book came out, still are calling him a traitor to his class. In other words, an honored champion of the middle class and the working people and the poor and so forth. It's outrageous that our intellectual community and our major media, as you very well know, are such captives of these elitists that this truth is still denied to the American people.
Yeah, they're captives and cowards. And they're traitors to the people because they won't tell the truth. And we see that going on to this very day on CNN, MSNBC, the Washington Post, by the way. I'm going to do a video about them trying to do a hit piece on SGT Report and the alternative media recently. The New York Times. These people are captured cowards that serve the elite. They don't serve the people. And I just want to make that clear for anybody who calls us or anybody else in the alternative media space fake news. But you're right. It was the banksters via, I think, the Rothschilds, who funded the Bolshevik Revolution, and then they murdered the Tsar and his family. They murdered men, women,
Yes.
and children. They
Yes.
murdered them all in cold blood.
Yes.
And of
And
course,
they murdered about 60 million other Christian Russians.
and I think
Uh,
Putin, my point here is that Putin's got a long memory. I think Putin remembers that. And so let's talk about the world stage. Let's talk about Putin and Trump. Your important article on December 3rd called "The Plan is Working." Folks, let me just read this passage. Last December 29th, less than 1 year ago, Wayne Jett writes, a report announced the arrival of what President Donald Trump had called the storm. Indeed, the storm had arrived 8 days earlier when the president's executive order became effective, declaring a national emergency to deal with serious human rights abuses and corruption. This powerful EO, which freezes assets worldwide of each person or entity named in a growing list, has been highly relevant to national and international affairs from its inception. Now, with 2018 midterm campaigning completed, more of the storm's actions will move into the open, enabling the public to observe more of what it craves: actions against criminals who have subverted national interests. What an outstanding opening paragraph to your article there. The plan is working. Describe the plan and how it's working in your view, Wayne.
well, certainly it has a number of levels, a number of fronts and so forth. But essentially, what I've seen and believe has been going forward so far has been the undercutting of the financial strength of the cabal itself. Those kinds of things certainly are tied into that executive order. It is a very powerful tool of cutting those people away from their wealth and their ability to transfer and use their wealth around the world. And then when they are in that position, I mean, for example, we've seen evidence of this with so many of the top executives of major operations, whether you're talking Google, you're very familiar with all those things. Those events would occur. They would separate themselves from those organizations only in order to try to shield themselves or the organizations and the use of their funds from that executive order. The executive order freezes those funds and takes the financial power of the ruling cabal out of their hands. And that then allows those people to be flushed into the open, very possibly subdued or arrested. These are things that I think have been kept out of sight, whether we'd like it or not. But so many of these things are taking place in the international police organization, Interpol, and so forth. But certainly, in my belief, not that I have direct information about it, any more than certainly you and your audience have, would be the military participation of the United States. Military forces have been used in these operations. I certainly remember a significant one being reported in Thailand, in which a plantation, a very luxurious plantation, was raided there by our Delta Force, as I recall.
I recall reading that as well.
With the Thai government's cooperation. The coffee was still warm when they got inside the plantation in the cups. And what do they find there? Not only the very luxurious place, but $200 million in gold bars. And there have been reports that a number of those places were found across Southeast Asia. And who did they belong to? They belong to Solyndra, that solar firm that the previous Obama administration had given something like $2 billion to develop solar energy. And then, of course, a year or two later, that firm went bankrupt and out of business. That's where the $2 billion, I suppose, went. And I suspect we have a former president that has an interest in how that gold is disposed of, or the use of all that property.
Right. Well, you know what I find fascinating? You mentioned Barry Soetoro in the previous administration, who I think, correct me if I'm wrong if I have this number wrong, but I think he gave the Iranian government $150 billion, if memory serves. Maybe I have that number a bit high, but I think that was the number. And yet these criminal Democrats don't want to put up $5 billion for a wall to protect our sovereignty. Don't you find it fascinating how duplicitous these people are? To anybody who's paying attention, it's never been more clear that people like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Hillary Clinton are hardcore criminals. They are the same puppet tools of these banksters that you've described that we've endured for decades.
No question about it, and in spades. And I would say on one thing, it has been my understanding and belief that the money transferred to Iran was actually Iranian assets that were seized at the time of the disputes and conflicts with Iran took place in the first place. That is, they were not U.S. tax money. They were assets that we were simply releasing. However, it was done in such a way as to a large part of it being done in cash, I believe, so that the cash could be used in payoffs and bribes to various politicians around the world and others playmakers.
Right. Well, I mean, the bottom line here is that Barry Soetoro is a CIA creation. I don't think we've ever endured a president that had multiple Social Security numbers, 5, I believe, if memory serves. Let me ask you this. What a fascinating interview, by the way. Maybe one of the most interesting interviews that I've ever had the pleasure of conducting. You're just a wealth of knowledge, so I really appreciate your time. And, you know, we can't go on here forever, but I'm really enjoying the conversation. So let me ask you this. If you were advising President Trump, who is clearly an enemy of these people, and the reason I firmly believe that is because on a daily basis, if you go to CNN, you see them cast aspersions and bring on people to bear false witness against this president ad nauseum 24 hours a day. It has literally become the anti-Trump news network, which he rightly calls fake news. If you were advising President Trump on how to deal with the Fed, dismantle the Fed, take the power back from the Fed, give it to the Treasury, what possible steps would you take? Because again, according to my last guest, David Jensen, it needs to happen because even if the Fed were to stop raising rates right now, or in the words of David Jensen, even if they reversed and lowered rates, it's too late. A major recession is coming and probably a global depression. How does this president stop it?
Well, he can certainly have in place a stable monetary system to take the Fed's place. And the only way I know to do that is with gold backing. I believe that he has advice already. A woman economist, I've looked her up before, and I wasn't familiar with her before her role in this administration. But her views appear to be very close to mine. And she appears to be quite well informed about the need for gold backing. The role of gold is not because it's so shiny, it's because it doesn't change in its substance. Nature has made it a substance that does not change its quality by rusting or wearing away or anything of the sort. So therefore, it has a very stable value. It's not used up and so forth. So the real role of gold is as a measuring stick of the value of quantity, of value of money. So it's possible to design a paper currency. Certainly it needs to be exchangeable for gold in order to keep the currency honest. But the problem with paper currency is that you're taking it as valuable when it is nothing but paper. And so you're right now we're depending upon a Federal Reserve promise, which is completely ethereal because there's no promise on the currency even anymore. But supposedly the promise was they would provide you the amount of value that a dollar is worth, which of course, again, is hard to say because they keep changing it. But the reason it is called a debt currency is not because we borrow it, it's because they owe us something of value for what they're exchanging for the dollars they're printing.
Mm-hmm.
The Federal Reserve is a major debtor to the world, and yet its assets are clearly far insufficient to cover that. But it gets value for every dollar that it issues, whether it's treasury bonds or whatever it buys. It's buying mortgages now. But essentially, they send so many dollars out the back door. That's why they don't allow an audit.
Right.
We don't know what they're doing with the money.
But they don't allow an audit of Fort Knox either. So let me ask you this then. If President Trump were to introduce a new currency or some new monetary system to take the place of the Fed, first of all, do you believe that there is gold in Fort Knox to back a new currency? I'm skeptical about it. Q has said the gold's there. I'm, again, very skeptical. I'm also skeptical that we landed men on the moon and brought them back safely, but Q says we did. So I've got some differing beliefs from some of the things I've seen Q post recently. But do you think the gold is in Fort Knox? And even if it is, and even if President Trump was to introduce a new monetary system, is there any way the American people escape what's coming with their wealth still intact?
Well, I doubt the gold is in Fort Knox. I know that QAnon said recently, we have the gold or something of that nature. He didn't say it was Fort Knox, at least recently.
That's true. That's a good point. There may be other sources of gold and clawbacks happening because of the EOs, because of what you described there in, what was it, Thailand, where that raid happened and they found
Yes.
the two. Yeah, no, you're right. And there was plenty of gold found in Iraq. Saddam Hussein's gold, which was stolen, just like they stole from Gaddafi and killed him. But that was under Clinton's watch, folks. Can't blame President Trump for that. But you're right. Maybe the gold is there, but in different forms.
I think there are major amounts of gold, and I think military operations most likely have been involved in recovering them. There have been there's been, I think, major stealing, theft of gold from the United States, certainly from other countries as well. Some of that has come through the United States and has been pilfered from it, including by former presidents, I believe. But nevertheless, there are a number of sources from which our military have been reported in actions, particularly in the South Pacific, in recovering amounts that had been stolen and taken there. But I'm going to leave it at that as far as QAnon is concerned. One of the important indicators to me, so far as new currency is concerned and the goals of the president, come from the fact that he has been working on getting a balanced current account so far as foreign trade is concerned. As you well understand, we've had a very, very unsatisfactory situation for years of our current account deficit being something like $800 billion per year. You cannot have a gold currency in that circumstance, because it would be an obligation of the United States to transfer $800 billion worth of gold out of the country to other countries every year, so long as that deficit occurs. That obviously couldn't occur very long, because we'd run out of gold much more quickly than 1 year. So what I'm saying is he's doing this tariff and rebargaining our international trade agreements in order to get that current account deficit back down to even. When we have it close to even, we can go to a gold-backed currency, because we won't be losing all of our gold in the first year, and that would give us a stable currency. And the problem is we need to have that currency system ready to go as quickly as possible before the Fed is pulled down. We need to make the move before the Fed crashes the dollar. And I believe, although I have no, it seems to me that's got to be their game plan in order to try to make the chaos as brief as possible when this change is made, because it certainly has the prospects of being chaotic.
Mm-hmm.
it may very well be that, part of the plan and how complex it is taking down these financial aspects of the cabal and replacing them with a system that's ready to go in the meantime, so that they don't have the power to cause as much chaos as they've been capable of in the past.
Well, the banksters love chaos, order out of chaos. They thrive on chaos. They love to destroy so that they can pick through the rubble and find the valuables and then rebuild and then erase the history and tell a false history. It's what they've done for centuries and centuries and centuries. And that's why I think your comments there about H.G. Wells are so interesting, because what you described is this Illuminati structure that has controlled the world since the beginning of time. The very precious few with everything controlling the many with nothing. That is the society they want. That's the world they want. That's the New World Order that George H.W. Bush so glowingly spoke about, so reverently spoke about so many times, more than 200 times as president. But if there's good news, Wayne, it's this. David Rockefeller, deceased. George H.W. Bush, deceased. These people don't get to live forever. And now that so many of us are waking up, people all over the world are waking up. We see the French waking up. We see Macron, the puppet of Rothschild, with an approval rating below 20. People want to topple the sitting government there in France. His own military has called him a traitor. People are waking up all over this world, aren't they, Wayne? Isn't that the best possible news? And isn't that what scares the hell out of these people?
Well, let me tell you, I'm still living on the exhilaration of having dodged the bullet in November of 2016.
Yeah, if the witch had gotten into the White House, it would have been game over, the final nail in our coffins, because the same thing that Macron's doing to France and Merkel's doing to Germany, that witch would have done to us.
Oh, my goodness. I mean, and worse. And to have the circumstance of having a president elected clearly as an outsider. I mean, people who think that I still get people insisting that he is an operative, he's just concealing and so forth. We would not have seen any of the things that we've been seeing in terms of the controversy, in terms of going into the global system. If we had not had a president elected outside of that establishment, I've indicated this before, but the spectacle of the Bush family walking across from the Republicans and backing Hillary, maybe not so much in public, but they certainly did in fact, and it was well known. That has made my point that I've made for years now. There is only one establishment. There is only one really ruling cabal. Yes, there are different members of it, but in terms of the ruling cabal, that cabal controls both parties. And I would venture to say even the independents to a certain extent. There's just so much money there that they have the ability to control politics in whatever ways seem to challenge them.
Yeah, let me ask you something, though, before we go. I want your odds on this and your thoughts on this. So the witch said in a panic after an NBC interview, I believe, with Matt Lauer, I believe she said, if that son of a bitch wins, we'll all hang from nooses. They saw what was coming. And to your point, it was George H.W. Bush, I believe, before his death, who said his vote was for Hillary and the American people should vote for Hillary. So that, to me, illustrates the fact that Trump was not part of this cabal as well. What are your thoughts on the witch being arrested and tried for her many, many crimes, be it Clinton Foundation, Uranium One, just basic sedition and treason? There's a litany of crimes for which Hillary Clinton could be arrested today by U.S. Marshals. I wonder if she will be. Your thoughts?
She's going to be arrested. I'm confident of it. I mean, this, again, is my opinion. I have no inside information, but I'm confident that these things are going to come to pass. There is not another way out of this. The evil is just too great. Either we're going to fight it and defeat it, or we're going to get rid of it. And it's not possible to just let it slide on by if we're going to deal with the kinds of things that have been done to children, to women, to men, the kinds of evil that have been going on that you and your audience, I'm sure, are well aware of. This is outrageous and it's got to stop. And I think we have plenty of good people that are dedicated to making it stop. This isn't just the United States by any means. The cabal, as hard to believe for many Americans as this may be, but my Lord, think of living under the Queen in any part of the kingdom that the Queen rules over. Whether they call it the Commonwealth or whatever, you know what the power of that money is wherever she reigns. And I think these things are being dealt with. There's no chance that these executive orders, well, I guess there might be 1%, but I don't believe it. And I think that it's going to happen. We're going to have the arrests. We're going to have the punishments. It may very well be that what we're going to be getting tired of would be described in one way as winning, but it could be very tiresome for all of these punishments of the people who've done these crimes that cannot be disregarded any longer.
Well, we will never get tired of the trials of the bad guys if those trials come. Now, we've heard that secret military tribunals will be happening for a great many of these people, but I believe it was Brennan, the promise has been made that that will be a public trial for his treason. As we round out this interview, Wayne, I want to ask you how people can get the book, but while we're doing that, I'm going to play this clip of President Trump approaching Marine One and fetching the hat of one of these Marines. And I just think it really paints the picture of his reverence for the Constitution and the rule of law in the military, the same exact military for which Hillary the Witch Clinton has nothing but contempt. And we know that from when she and Bill were in the White House. She had contempt for the military, for the Secret Service, contempt for the country, the rule of law. And when they left the White House, they looted the place and were ultimately forced to return all the furniture and stuff that they stole. They're literal hardcore criminals. And I pray to God, Jesus in heaven, hear our prayers. We need to see this woman arrested, and we need to see a public trial as she's tried for her litany of crimes against the Bill of Rights and Constitution. Wayne, can you tell people how to get the book? And again, shout out your wonderful website there, Classical Capital.
ClassicalCapital.com has a place there to buy it. If you buy the Fruits of Graft at ClassicalCapital.com, the price is $25, and I ship for free, and I ship by priority mail to make sure it gets there. You can also get it on Amazon. Those are basically the two outlets. It's not on bookshelves and bookstores anyplace. There's one of H.G. Wells's approaches that he spelled out was the publishers have to be controlled. We don't want books getting out that have information in them that we don't want to get to the public. And that policy has certainly been alive and well as far as I've been able to tell.
Yeah, well, now that policy is to do the same thing to the alternative media. So that's my next video report, guys, will be about Washington Post and their lies about the alternative media, covering up for Hillary Clinton and her crimes. Crimes against children, according to, I believe it was The Hill that reported about what was found on Anthony Weiner's laptop. A hit piece was done, which included a hit piece on SGT Report and the alternative media, because again, Wayne, as you know, they don't want the truth getting out through books or through the alternative media today on the internet, which has really been the saving grace.
I might just mention a thing that I have not really figured out yet, but I've actually gone on to Amazon and found used copies of my book. Most recently, the lowest price I could find, I believe, was something like $40 or $45. But I've found my used books, used copies, for sale as much as $700, $400. And so I don't know what's going on there. I haven't figured that out. I don't know whether they're trying to discourage interest in it or what, but that, in fact, has been my experience with dealing with Amazon. And it's really remarkable that publishing is as it is, but the universities are the same way.
Well, let me ask you something. If people were to come to your website there to get the book, classicalcapital.com, is there a chance you could sign books for folks? Because I think my audience is very supportive, and I don't know if you want to take that on. It might result in a lot of hand cramps.
It does get difficult. I have done that because there have not been that many, but your audience is very large. I know that, and I respect it very much. I've admired your work, I wanted to say.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, back at you. We'll have to get you back on again because this was just a fascinating conversation.
Well, I might say there are at least a half a dozen other acts by FDR, worse than what I've described from you for you so far, in terms of his unbelievable ways of keeping money out of the economy and sapping and draining money from the economy in order to make that depression. And I would say that the only two studies I know about, social studies done of the effects in terms of starvation, one German social scientist estimated or counted at least 3 million dead of starvation in the United States. A Russian social scientist counted at least 6 million. I don't know that we've gotten to the truth of that matter yet in terms of the data available, but you can imagine not everybody gets on the rolls when they die of starvation.
Yeah, no, it's genocide any way you cut it. And frankly, I think we've seen genocide with the California wildfires and what happened in Paradise. They're covering up the real number of dead in Paradise because that entire city, that entire area was torched and people were burned alive, and the military has locked it down. And I don't know that we'll ever know the full truth about what happened out there, but I'll say this, PG&E, which is culpable in these fires, including some of the fires a year ago in Santa Rosa, PG&E is culpable in this new fire. And it was criminal Governor Jerry Brown who signed an order into law allowing PG&E and other utilities like them to pass the costs of these losses and coming lawsuits onto the customers. So again, it's just more of the same. We've seen this stuff happening for decade after decade after decade, and what we need is the bad guys rounded up and thrown in jail. We need to see the rule of law. That's what we need, Wayne. You know what? I could talk with you for another hour. Why don't we get you back on here in the next couple of months, and we'll dig deeper into the crimes of the past, and hopefully we'll have a good story to tell about the future. Wayne, thank you so much. The book is The Fruits of Graft, Great Depressions Then and Now. The website is classicalcapital.com, and our guest has been Wayne Jett. Wayne, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean.
Thank you. I so much appreciate your time. And guys, how could this conversation not have resonated with you? If it did, please do give it a like and spread it far and wide within your sphere of influence on social media. It is at this point, as I've said so many times before, guys, at this point in human history, it's us versus the banksters. And it truly is a war. Thanks so much for tuning in. And for real news 24/7, do visit us at sgtreport.com and thelibertymill.com. God bless.
You're going to see arrests, and then you're going to see indictments, and then you're going to see convictions. They are scared to death.